Hey guys, it's APT Songs here, and I just wanted to give my thoughts on Kanye West's new album, Donda. This is a surprise album drop that wasn't really a surprise. It was supposed to drop a month ago, but it just dropped on Sunday yesterday. And when I first listened to it, I was going to give a review, my first thoughts right away, but I thought it would be good to sit with this for a little bit to kind of hear it a few more times before I really figured out what my feelings about it were. So these are just some thoughts. This isn't really a review as much as my thoughts about the album. So my first thought when I heard through it was I couldn't tell if I liked it or not. There were a lot of great things about the album that I liked in terms of the lyricism, in terms of the delivery of things, the guest features, but there were also some things I didn't like about it, but I couldn't figure out what it was. All I knew was that at almost 2 hours long, it seemed way too long and that I would have liked it to have been shorter. But I couldn't figure out what that thing was. And so after hearing it a couple of times, this is what I realized, is that overall, I like this album. It's a pretty decent album. But with that said, I found that most of the songs usually have something about them in it that is annoying to me, that if I could skip past those parts of the song, it would be a cohesively great song. But when those moments come in, I get annoyed and the album slows down for me. And I'm like, can we just get on to either the next lyric or the next song? Perfect example. There are songs on here that have long stretches of time where you just hear the instrumental. The problem with that is that the instrumentals themselves are not usually interesting or varied enough to have long stretches of time where it's just the beat playing. It would be different, for example, if say like on a song he's playing with the organ and then all of a sudden like a guitar solo came in and then the drums would switch up or something. That would be something where the instrumental could sit for a while because there's new elements that are being brought out as the time goes on with this instrumental playing. With Kanye, though, you might hear a simple drum hit and a beep in the background and a piano playing, and that be the sole repeated thing that you're hearing for like 2 minutes straight. And so, again, I recognize that Kanye is trying to set a mood here, but a lot of times once he's introduced the beat, it stays like that. And back in the day, Kanye would create a beat and then he'd have all these varieties that were added to the beat as it plays along to where it's worth sitting through. This one, not so much. Now, that may have been purposeful because I know with the album being called Donda, named after his late mother, that maybe it's a more solemn affair and he's trying to keep that downbeaten, monotonous tone as a way of symbolizing like grief and death and how monotonous it can feel. But as a listener, if I just came to this not knowing why it was called Donda or about his mom or anything like that, I would be like, this is really annoying. Also, he has a few songs whereby the endings in particular, or sometimes the beginnings, have people just talking and speaking, and they're not really saying anything of interest. He has one song where Larry Hoover Jr. is just talking for 2 straight minutes, thanking Kanye for trying to get his dad out of jail. Again, maybe it's important that Kanye put this on his record, but I'm just sitting there like, it's the end of the song. Why am I now sitting through 2 minutes of this guy talking? He's not singing, he's not rapping, he's just talking and talking and talking. And to me, it's not a very interesting conversation that he's having. That said, like I said, there were a lot of things that I did like about this album. For one, this feels more like a Kanye mixtape in terms of how much his presence is on here, because the majority of these songs, he has a guest feature on there to where he is like rapping 1, maybe 2 verses, or maybe possibly the chorus, but he has a lot of guest features on here. Most, by the way, interestingly enough, are not Christian rappers. Like, this album is definitely still Kanye in his Christian lane in the sense of he's rapping a lot about God, about coming to God. He's rapping about some of his struggles and basically his testimony about this. He's rapping about his family life and stuff like that. And so the guest features that he has on here, most of those people are very good at being able to stay in a similar lane as the topics of the conversation, bringing their own thing to it. But he also edits out any curse words, any N-words, any curse words on here, he edits out because he's still trying to keep this a parental advisory free affair. Even there are times on this album where seemingly he cussed or said something and that he then edited his own self out. And as a guy that honestly, I grew up under a mom that wouldn't allow us to bring non-edited records to the house. So most of the rap I grew up on listening to had edits in it. So for me, this wasn't like a hard thing to listen to. And it wasn't, and even the artists that are cursing, they don't really curse a whole lot. So there's not a whole lot of, it's not like every other word has to be edited. I think Styles P from The Lox probably says the most curse words. He says the N-word quite a few times and they just blank it out. But it was interesting that that was a choice that was made. So I'm glad he's still staying on that path if he's trying to follow towards the path of, being more towards God. But I also like that he was still able to make songs on this one that were poppy, that, still talked about real life stuff. And I felt that, the direction he was going on this previous album, I think it was Jesus. I honestly forget the name of the album at the moment in time. Forgive me. But the last album, it was his first Christian album. Those songs really, to me, weren't as strong. There was a lot of more singing on there. Wasn't a lot of him rapping. So I'm glad to hear Kanye rapping more so again. In fact, I would say, honestly, outside of the not cussing part, this feels the most like the old version of Kanye that we've got in a long time in terms of him talking about fashion, clothes, about him talking his crap about how great he is, mixed in with the newer version of Kanye where he's talking about family, about loss, about these other things, but it's still in a way where it feels very, very Kanye-ish, even to the point where even he's trying new flows on this album. He's trying new beats. He has a couple of songs on here that have like the drill beat on them and other beat types that are more stylistic to today. And so he's definitely upped his producer game. It's just, again, once those beats are introduced, that's what you're hearing. So when they go on for a long period of time, I'm not a fan. Also, that is not to say that there aren't some clunkers on this album. I would say this being as long of an album as it is, it's definitely supposed to be meant to be a double disc album. So if I were going by the old school way of like, oh, this is double disc, I would say the first half of this album is a lot stronger. It starts off strong with a lot of pop, hip hop, trap leaning type beats. And then as you get towards the other half of the album, it goes into more church sounding stuff. And honestly, of the two sides, I think the main reason I have more of a dislike for the second half of the album in terms of the beat structure is because a lot of those beats sound like old school church beats. I grew up in a Baptist church where you'd hear the organ playing, the keyboards playing, and it'd be like these slow tunes that the choir would then try to sing to. A lot of the second half of this album sounds like that, but with somebody trying to rap instead. So again, it's not like they're the worst beats in the world, but it did make me flash back to like Sunday school service where I'm sitting there just like, okay, they're going to put on sing a song. Oh my God, it's this old 1870s style beat song. And we kind of try to add a twist to it, but I still feel like I'm in church and I'm slogging through this. And the word, it's sad because like most of these songs, the words are great, the flows are great, the guests are great, but towards the back half of the album, the beats aren't really to my liking. And maybe it's just because I'm not a fan of like the slower, monotonous beats that he decided to use. That's just a preference choice. That doesn't make it a bad choice per se for the mood of the album. It just doesn't make me a fan of those songs in particular. And especially when, again, he has times where he's repeating the beat or he's having these long stretches where it goes from like the chorus to now I'm waiting for the lyrics to come in, but it's like a 30-second stretch of beat where I'm just like, can we just get to the freaking song? Lastly, like I said before, this album didn't need to be this long. And part of the reason for that is because after song 23, he has 4 more songs that are basically repeats of songs that he already put on the album, but with new artists. So, for example, he has a song here called Jail featuring Jay-Z, who has a stellar verse on the first version of this song. Then there's a second version called Jail Part 2, which features DaBaby and Marilyn Manson. And I know there's been controversy about those guys being on this album based on some of the things they've done in the media recently. But the point is, DaBaby actually delivers a stellar verse on this. He has a different flow on this song as well. My problem is this. You could have combined your verse on here, Kanye, with Jay's verse and DaBaby's verse all on the same track. He has a song called OK OK Part 2. He had OK OK Part 1 on here. He has different artists on this particular version. He could have just put those artists on that version. And then the real sloth here is Jesus Lord Part 2, because in the first version of the song, it's him, Jay Electronica, and then the 2-minute outro with Larry Hoover Jr. on it. And that song is already 8 minutes and something odd seconds for the original version. Then for the end version of the album, he tries to add on the locks, which is 3 different verses. So now the song goes from being 8 minutes and 20-something seconds to like almost 12 minutes long. And again, if you wanted to do that, you could have either A, put them all on one version of the song and just had the one version, or B, given the locks a second song altogether. Because they didn't have to be on this song. They could have had their own original song. There are 3 of them. You could have made a 5 to 6 minute song with just the locks. So adding them on to Jesus Lord Part 2, it just makes the album really, really end on a slow note. And it's sad because that's an example of a beat that is a long song, but the beat's so great, I don't mind hearing it combined with the Jesus Lord. Like that sounded really good. In fact, come to think of it, some of the best beats on this album end up being some of the shortest songs. And those are songs that I wish he would have expanded, because those are the songs where like the beat's actually up tempo and lively and he's got a good flow going, but he only does like one verse and then it's on to the next song. And I felt like some of the songs that were longer could have been shorter, and some of the shorter songs that actually had decent beats I would like to hear more of. So overall, this is in no way a bad album. It is actually enjoyable in many, many parts, but I do find that there are various annoyances in a wide variety of the songs to where it makes it a listen that I can tolerate, but it's not as thoroughly enjoyable as some of his previous albums. My favorite Kanye album to this day is still My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and that's an album where, again, he had a lot of beats that were longer on there, but the beats were more interesting and there were change-ups on them. And so that's not to say that this album is bad. It just, I wish at times he could have really thought about his beat choices and what he was doing and how long he was letting them linger. Because this album does feel like a collage of like the best of Kanye. There's some Yeezus sounding songs on here. There's some beautiful Twisted Fantasy songs on here. There's definitely some songs that sound like 808 and Heartbreaks with a little beep in the background on some of the songs. And so he's taken the best of what he's done and put it together here. But here, it's not showing the best collectively of what he's done based on his past. So still an enjoyable album. I can just skip through some of the parts of the albums where it's like it's a little too slow or needs to move on. So I'd say it's definitely worth listening to. But yeah, he could have trimmed the fat of this. This thing's like 27 songs long. This could have been a solid 15-song banger, and he could have shortened some of the parts where he stretched out the instrumental, and it would have been an extremely great album. As far as it is right now, it's just a good album. But I don't think most artists, honestly, need to be releasing double albums, especially hip-hop, because hip-hop, overall, you start to really see some of the cracks and flaws in an artist's ability to make songs as they have longer albums, especially in hip-hop for some reason. Like, to me, the best double albums that have been put out so far have been B.I.G.'s Life After Death, which still had songs in there that could have been cut. I think Drake's Scorpion actually is one of the better double disc albums. And even that one on his second half where he had some of the R&B joints, he could have cut like 4 of those songs and had a solid like 20-something songs or whatever. This one could have been cut down significantly and been much more enjoyable in a shorter fashion. But all that said, still take a listen to it. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think about the album. You can leave a comment down below to let me know what you think, if you agree, if you disagree, and let me know what albums you'd like me to review next. That's all I got. I'm APT Songs, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.